BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Feel free to come on in and chill with the birds. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that here on Black Box Online Radio, there is a new set of short episodes that will be coming out, and yes indeed, released as YouTube shorts. They are called 1-minute true crime book reviews, and because I've been talking to you guys about the Zodiac Killer a lot here on the Monday segment, the majority of them will be dedicated to the Zodiac Killer, and if you're curious about other true crime cases as well, feel free to check those out. This show comes out 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Zodiac Monday. Lately, Wednesdays have been devoted to Jack the Ripper, and Friday is the Anything Goes segment. And on the off days, the other 4 days of the week, I will be releasing some 1-minute true crime book reviews. I already have 2 out now on Zodiac Unmasked and Time 17 by Gareth Penn. And yes, they're books that I've talked about here on Black Box Online Radio in the longer segments, but I wanted to see if I could just explore YouTube Shorts a little bit more, and I will be making several Zodiac Killer book reviews that you guys can listen to here on YouTube for free. So feel free to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. And a great way that you can support all of these efforts is to go over to BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88. There's a link to that in the description box. BuyMeACoffee.com allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Last week on this show, I was talking about the Zodiac Killer suspect Richard Gaikowski, and I had encountered some new possible Zodiac activity in the 1980s that could be connected to this suspect. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated definitely in the 1960s, now possibly into the 70s, but I thought for this episode it might be beneficial to actually arrange some of these theories in order, and in all seriousness, I believe that that's one thing that I've actually been successful at here on Black Box Online Radio. Even if I can't tell you every secret of the Zodiac Killer mystery, I have been able to not only organize some of the timelines involving certain suspects, but also organize the theories that other people have come up with and putting them in some type of order. So with the Zodiac Killer suspect Richard Gaikowski, he moved to California from South Dakota. He was originally from Watertown, South Dakota, and he moves to California definitely in 1963. Tom Foyd of ZodiacKiller.com just wrote into the channel recently saying that by 1963, Gaikowski was living in San Francisco on Parnassus Avenue. There was a History Channel show that came out earlier this year that was talking about how Gaikowski moved to California in 1964, but that appears to be incorrect. Gaikowski was in California living there in 1963. Now, it's possible that he moved to California earlier during one of his journalistic projects. Gaikowski was a journalist called The Battered Typewriter of Dick Gaikowski, where he would travel around, and that's very relevant because Geik could also be a suspect in the 1962 murder of Ray Davis, then the 1963 murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. That's in Southern California as well, near Gaviota Beach. The 1964 Swindle murders, the murders of Johnny Ray and Joyce Swindle that took place roughly in the San Diego area in a place called Ocean Beach. And then the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California, then getting to the actual Zodiac crimes that have been attributed to the Zodiac killer, the 1968 murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the 1969 murder of Darlene Ferrin on July 4th of that year, the September 27th, 1969 stabbing of Cecilia Ann Shepard, who passed away 2 days later in the hospital, and the October 11th, 1969 murder of Paul Stein in San Francisco. Alright, that's the narrative that most people are familiar with. But last week I was talking about some possible Zodiac activity in the 1980s, and I said I wanted to organize and expand upon it a little bit more, and I would like to begin with the 1984 disappearance of Kevin Collins. Now, a lot of this theorizing comes to us from an individual named Blaine Blaine, who more or less brought Gaikowski forward as the Zodiac killer suspect. Blaine is also known as Goldcatcher, and he will be releasing a 3-volume book soon about his Zodiac killer theories and observations, as well as talking about his connections to the Zodiac killer mystery, and I think a lot of it's going to center on his own personal story. But with Kevin Collins, he disappeared in 1984, and even though Blaine accuses Gaikowski of Kevin Collins' murder, he has not been located. I mean, you can just get on the true crime websites now and you'll see very clearly that Kevin Collins is still listed as missing. Kevin Collins was a young child who left a basketball practice and he was walking home. He went to a bus stop and was waiting for the 43 bus. Normally he was accompanied by his older brother, but his older brother was sick that day, and the last sighting of Kevin Collins was at the bus stop, and he appeared to have been talking to an older man with blonde hair, and he was never seen or heard from again. But according to the Wikipedia page, there actually is just a little bit of trivia that the missing persons poster for Kevin Collins was even featured in the movie The Terminator, the James Cameron film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's 84. Then going ahead to 1986 is a crime that I've only loosely talked about on the channel, and that is the 1986 murder of Leonard Carl Smith. Now, there was a post that was written out on Tappa Talk talking about how Blaine Blaine stated that Richard Gaikowski murdered Leonard Carl Smith for 2 particular reasons. One reason is to commemorate the mailing of the Zodiac killer's first letters and ciphers. The murder of Leonard Carl Smith took place on July 31st of 1986. Leonard Carl Smith was a taxi driver, and the Zodiac also murdered a taxi driver named Paul Stein, possibly murdered a taxi driver named Ray Davis. But with Leonard Carl Smith, that recreates could have been paying homage to the mailing of the Zodiac killer's Z408 cipher, as well as the first copies of the Zodiac's letters mailed on July 31st. Of 1969, and the reason that was written out on Tappa Talk was that Blaine Blaine had proposed that Leonard Carl Smith was actually murdered because Richard Gaikowski was aware that Blaine was suspicious of his activities as the Zodiac killer, and he did that to scare Blaine into silence. I know you guys are already going to be thinking about some responses to that. I have lots of responses, but I'll lay out some things in chronological order, and then I will talk about some commentary on them. Next would be the 1987 murder of Alexander Harris. This is the one that I was really talking about last week, and I have to give a shout out to Batman66 for introducing me to this story. And one of you guys in the comments section brought up a piece of clarity in the article that Batman66 had shared that was featured on the website TomDillardLasVegas.com. It talked about how Alexander Harris was not murdered in California. He was abducted and murdered in 1987 in Nevada, and that article said State Line, Nevada. However, from reading up on the subject more over the last week, yes, indeed, one of you guys in the comments section pointed out that it was not in the town of State Line, Nevada. It was actually just near the Nevada-California border in southern Nevada, though outside of Las Vegas, and I believe the confusion comes from the fact that a town in Nevada is called State Line, which is south of Reno, but this one was actually outside of Las Vegas, and it was 40 minutes from Las Vegas, near the California border, and Alexander Harris was abducted from a place called Whiskey Pete's Casino, and he was abducted and murdered, and there are multiple composite sketches of the person who had abducted him, and on the website that was shared to me last week, you can even see at the bottom of the composites, it says, sketch of the Alexander Harris murderer, but I was on a different website, and they provided a completely different composite, one where not only does it have a completely different age range for the alleged killer, the person's wearing sunglasses, meaning that most likely people did not see his eyes, and there's also a mole that is not present in the other composite sketches. So the long story short is I'm going to keep reading up on this one. But you'll notice something that is very, very much apparent with the murders of Kevin Collins and Alexander Harris. They were young children, and the Zodiac killer did not normally target children. With the murder of Leonard Carl Smith in 1986, he was a taxi driver. The Zodiac targeted at least one taxi driver. He was an adult. The Zodiac targeted adults. The only minors that were killed in the Zodiac murders were David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, who were 17 and 16 years old, respectively, the victims of the Lake Herman Road murders. And when I was reading the little information that has been shared about the murder of Leonard Carl Smith, it actually states that he had almost no friends. He was described as a loner, and someone else who lived in his complex stated that he never had a single visitor to the best of her knowledge, and it even took some effort for them to contact Leonard Carl Smith's mother, who was alive at the time in 1986 at the time of his murder. And I mean, the story about how Blaine said that Gaikowski murdered Leonard Carl Smith as a way to keep Blaine silent, there must be something that I am missing, because I mean, when I just hear something like that, I know that I shouldn't even be thinking this way, but why would somebody murder an innocent person to keep a person silent when that person who you don't want to talk is still alive? Wouldn't it have made more sense for Gaikowski to have just murdered Blaine as a way to get him out of the picture, make it look like an accident or something? I know I shouldn't even be hypothesizing like that, but that just seems like it would make a little bit more comprehensible sense to me. There must be something that I'm missing from that story and those interactions, which hopefully we will get to explore in Blaine's new book, because rest in peace to all of these victims, and as previously stated, Kevin Collins has never been located, but Blaine does accuse Gaikowski of the murder of Kevin Collins. And I think that there is something very different, though, about the psychopathology and the behavior of someone who is going to be abducting children from the bus stop and the activities of somebody like the Zodiac killer. Now, committing the taxicab murder, that seems more like the Zodiac killer of the 1960s. Somebody who is just going to sneak up on someone, blindside someone, shoot somebody in a defenseless position. But there usually is a different type of psychological factor that is driving somebody to commit these crimes against children. This is another reason why I don't believe Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac killer either, because he was a homosexual pedophile, targeted boys, a sex offender who targeted boys, and I just don't see the sex offender signatures in the Zodiac killer's crimes. But that's just me, though. What do you think about that? And what do you think about any of the composite sketches that have been shared in this? Do you think that they resemble the Zodiac killer? With both of the sketches in the Alexander Harris murder, I think they resemble the 1969 Zodiac killer composite. I mean, there definitely is a resemblance, I will admit that. But I'm really just left at that. Other than those particular details, I think there is somewhat of a different pattern altogether. However, the Zodiac crimes in the 1980s go well beyond just these ones in California and Nevada. There's also the 1981 murder of Joan Webster, then the 1986 murders of Koyin Seichao and Choi Fao Se Lee, which are known as the Sacramento Freeway murders. So, I mean, you can see that the Zodiac theorizing goes well into the 1980s, all the way into the late 1980s. The 1970s appear to be somewhat more of a blur for the Zodiac Killer because, firstly, the Zodiac Killer is going to try to abduct Kathleen Johns off of Highway Route 132 on March 22nd of 1970. This is the one where the Zodiac is, or somebody is telling Kathleen Johns, hey, you're driving your car and your wheel's wobbling, and she goes over to the side of the road and that person says he's going to fix it, but he actually makes it worse. I mean, I don't believe that it was the Zodiac Killer. But then there are other more ambiguous crimes, such as the abduction of Donna Lass that took place in the real state line, Nevada. Donna Lass disappeared, and we simply don't know what happened to her. It's the same deal with Kevin Collins. If they haven't located the person, if they haven't located their remains, it becomes very difficult to definitively say that that person was murdered. And I believe Donna Lass passed away shortly after her death and disappearance. Shortly after her disappearance, I misspoke. I believe Donna Lass was murdered shortly after her disappearance, but I can't prove that. And with Kevin Collins, I have only briefly read up on the subject, but I also believe that he was murdered shortly after his disappearance. However, there's a difference between having a gut instinct about something and being able to look at the hard evidence and demonstrate that very clearly that this is what happened. So that's where I have to leave it there. But for this episode, I would like to switch gears a little bit and give a shout out to longtime BBOR follower Stefan Nyberg, who has composed something new about the Zodiac Killer's Exorcist letter. I openly encourage you guys to read this. The title of it is Concerning the Exorcist Letter, A Layman's Analysis, an essay about a letter from the Zodiac Killer written by Stefan Nyberg, and you can get this on the website Scribd, and I'm going to include a link to that. If you actually go down, you'll see that there are a list of timestamps, what I call the quick reference, so you can follow along with the Zodiac Killer news report by the subjects, and you'll also see a link there, if the YouTube bots will allow me to post it, for Stefan's essay on the Exorcist letter. Now, the Exorcist letter is rather different than some of the Zodiac Killer's previous letters, because it was mailed in 1974, and it also follows a very big halt in Zodiac activity. Maybe you've heard of the 2-year halt on Zodiac activity, which is mostly for the years of 1972 or 73. The Exorcist letter would then come in 1974, and Stefan was very quick to point out that we have to look at what's present in the text of the letter, but also in what's not present. And immediately, we can see from the 1974 Exorcist letter that the Zodiac Killer chose not to begin with the lines, "This is the Zodiac speaking," or the single line, rather, "This is the Zodiac speaking." And as I was going through Stefan's essay on the Exorcist letter, he also provided a copy of the envelope which the Exorcist letter was mailed in, to the San Fran Chronicle, please rush to editor. And immediately, looking at this handwriting, this looks identical to the Zodiac's handwriting. If some way, somehow, somebody was able to forge the Zodiac's handwriting for the Exorcist letter, they would have to be the best forger that is on this side of heaven. I mean, I kid thee not. This looks absolutely identical to the Zodiac's handwriting. And it's not simply that I think that. For example, the letter D in the word editor has a very particular shape that the Zodiac Killer used in his letters, and that is that the letter D does not have a full circle, it doesn't even have a half circle. The loop in the letter D is made in somewhat of an ovular shape that is disconnected from the vertical line, and then the vertical line tilts to the right. This is something that the Zodiac Killer did very frequently, not to mention the overall right tilt period in all of the Zodiac letters. That is also present, and the Zodiac also abbreviated the word San Francisco to San Fran, and also saying to the editor. That is something that the Zodiac did very frequently. This does look very similar. And I'll read the text of the Exorcist letter for you guys, even though I've shared it in some previous Zodiac Killer news reports. I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. Signed, yours truly. He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. P.S. If I do not see this note in your paper, I will do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. And then there's some some odd symbols, and it says me 37 and SFPD 0. Now, some people, again, think that Richard Gaikowski was the Zodiac killer, and in 1974, they want to point out that Gaikowski's age should have been 37, but Geik didn't always tell the truth about his age. Sometimes he misrepresented it on documents and such. However, I would like to, though, look at the next part here, though, where it says he plunged himself into the billowy wave. That is very obviously attributed to the Mikado, and one thing that Stefan does in the essay is he wants to put that into context. Like, that is a piece of a song from Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta, The Mikado, and because I want you guys to read the essay, I'm not going to share too much of Stefan's analysis, but I will read the block text that he has shared of the Mikado song in context. On a tree by a river, a little tom-tit sang, "Willow, tit willow, tit willow." And I said to him, "Dicky bird, why do you sit, singing willow, tit willow, tit willow? Is it weakness of intellect, birdie," I cried, "or rather tough worm in your little inside?" With a shake of his poor little head he replied, "Oh willow, tit willow, tit willow." He slapped at his chest and he sat on that bough, singing willow, tit willow, tit willow. A cold perspiration bespangled his brow. Oh willow, tit willow, tit willow. He sobbed and he sighed and a gurgle he gave. Then he plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Oh willow, tit willow, tit willow. Now I just feel as sure I'm sure that my name isn't Willow, tit willow, tit willow, that 'twas blighted affection that made him exclaim, "Oh willow, tit willow, tit willow." And if you remain callous and obdurate, I shall perish as he did, and you will know why, though I probably shall not exclaim as I die, "Oh willow, tit willow, tit willow." And this part of the text that was used in the Exorcist letter could have been chosen for a very specific reason. There's somewhat of a split amongst Zodiac researchers, because some people think that the Zodiac was actually about to die and he was actually about to pass away, and that this is either a note of morbidity or that he was actually going to commit suicide, the suicide's grave. But what Stefan is going to argue and make a very convincing claim of in the essay is that it's actually more about putting the Zodiac killer persona to rest, and that means that the Zodiac killer is going to be done with this persona, and as a formal send-off, it doesn't even begin with "this is the Zodiac speaking." Instead, this is all about putting the character, the persona of the Zodiac killer, in the suicide's grave, and that this will not be his name anymore. And I do think that is somewhat of a reasonable observation. And also, the reason why the number 37 could also come up again is it might not be the age of the killer. Some people think that that could be the body count that has been attributed to the Zodiac. The Zodiac is taking credit for 37 murders, and that he's giving one last chance to show that he committed 37 of these crimes. I mean, it really is uncertain, but Stefan will also show some very strong and persuasive claims in the essay that the Exorcist letter is indeed authentic, just to ease anybody's suspicion. And because I want you to read that, I will encourage you to just click on the link below and visit Stefan Nyberg's essay about the Exorcist letter. But let's look at some other observations about this one, because the Zodiac was very, very well known to misspell words. The Zodiac misspelled words all the time. In that July 31st, 1967, July 31st, 1969 letter that I was talking about, where the Zodiac announces himself to the world, he also doesn't use the introductory line, "This is the Zodiac speaking," mind you, but then he says that he is the murderer of the two teenagers last Christmas, and Christmas is spelled Christmas. I mean, the Zodiac misspelled words frequently, and they were words that he should have been able to spell. Let's look at some of the misspellings here, and Stefan will also organize these in his essay, but I saw plus think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I've ever seen. The word satirical is misspelled, and the word comedy is misspelled. Signed, yours truly. Truly is misspelled. I mean, the misspellings are just on overdrive in the Exorcist letter. He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. Now, did you catch that that's a misquote? That the Zodiac is misquoting the part of the Mikado because it's actually willow, titwillow, titwillow, not titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. And I just, that's the first time that I've noticed that the Zodiac is not only misquoting other parts of the Mikado and other pieces of writing, but even this line here, it's a small nitpicking difference, but oh willow titwillow titwillow, that is a little bit different. And it was actually Gareth Penn was the first person to draw this to my attention. And in his book Time 17, he talks about even the words titwillow 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 are misspelled. Willow is spelled Willo in the Exorcist letter. So the misspellings here are very frequent, and they're almost just shockingly frequent. I mean, some of these words might be hard for somebody to spell if they weren't using spell check and such. Satirical. Okay, not everybody would be able to get that one. However, I believe that the misspellings in the Zodiac's writings are indeed intentional. And was this just somebody trying to have one last hurrah, one last go at the Zodiac persona? And the intentional misspellings might even be just to keep people guessing until the end of time, or it also is just something awkward. Or as one guy that I talked to last year about the Zodiac Killer mystery, his name's Sphere the Cube. He is known as Sphery. He has a Zodiac Killer suspect named Robert Volvins, and he talked about how the Zodiac was making a mockery of everything in civilization. He's making a mockery of our institutions. He's making a mockery of the justice system, writing these letters that are mocking the police. And he is also making a mockery of our educational system by writing these letters with obvious misspellings. And I do think that there is a strong possibility that that is true. And the Zodiac is just saying that he's going to attack a school bus and get the kiddies as they come bouncing out. He's going to detonate a bus bomb. He is just, I mean, making a mockery in a terrorist-style way, in a terrorological way. But he's doing that all the same, just trying to make everything in society just darkened. That's what he's trying to do. And I do think that is a reasonable observation. But as for the Exorcist letter, one more time, it's called Concerning the Exorcist Letter, a Layman's Analysis, an essay about a letter from the Zodiac Killer, written by Stefan Nyberg. I think that it's very well worded and very persuasive, especially when he gets into some of the handwriting analysis in the Exorcist letter. One more time, available on Scribd. Please look at the link down below. Now, to go to something a little bit more extreme, because some people might think that it's extreme to look at some of these Zodiac Killer crimes in the 1980s, where Kevin Collins is being abducted, and the murder of Leonard Smith, and the murder of Alexander Harris, and they think those are far out. Well, let's go in the opposite direction, because one of the crimes that I would like to zone in on is the Zodiac Killer Black Dahlia connection, because I feel that there's some unfinished work to do with that one, and numerous people, multiple people, have accused their Zodiac Killer suspect of committing the Black Dahlia murder in 1947, most famously Steve Hodel, who's the author of the books Most Evil, as well as the Black Dahlia Avenger series, and he accuses his own father, George Hodel, of being the Black Dahlia Avenger in the Zodiac. There's also a connection between Ed Edwards and the Black Dahlia case and the Zodiac case that has been established by John Cameron. And on the cover of Harriet Sucker's book about Jack Torrance, it mentions that he is going to be a suspect in both the Zodiac and the Black Dahlia case, although I confess I haven't read that one, and I'm not too familiar with her observations. But last year on the channel, somebody recommended a book called Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pugh Eatwell, and Pugh Eatwell is a British writer who now lives in France, and she has attempted to solve the Zodiac, not the Zodiac mystery, the Black Dahlia mystery, and there are several different books that you've seen the covers of going by on this channel, and I'm simply at the point where I want to investigate further, not only for the Zodiac connection, but also for trying to learn more about the Black Dahlia case, because that one remains unsolved. But let's look at this book review that was written by Jackie Law, available on the Website neverimitate.wordpress.com. Black Dahlia Red Rose by Pewee Will is a re-examination of a brutal murder that occurred 70 years ago in America, which has never been officially solved. Told as a true crime story, it offers a snapshot of Los Angeles that its police department and citizens would have in an era that would be familiar with film. As the author writes in her preface, this era is commonly visualized through the movies as the era of film noir, a time of corrupt cops and gun-toting gangsters, cynical heroes, and bottle blondes doling out deadpan one-liners. But the slick film noir repartee in the does not match the brutal inequalities of reality. In truth, it was a tough time after a tough war in a tough world. And I think that the 1940s were a very different time than the Zodiac Killer's main period of activity, the 1960s, because there's one theory out there that the Zodiac Killer persona was adopted as a method of counterculture, like counterculture to the counterculture of the 1960s, and it's about trying to just make a mockery, again, that word again, right? Or to bring a dark cloud over San Francisco, which was the haven for the hippies and peace, love, and joy, and all of that. And the Zodiac Killer is actually trying to just say that he hates hippies and that he wants terror and misery to be in San Francisco, simply for the fact that it is more honest. And this was explored in the book Lords of Chaos, when it talks about how the hippie movement is all about peace, love, and joy, and then people just viewed them as absolute hypocrites. And one of the things that took place was the rise of the Church of Satan in 1966. This is post Aleister Crowley, and this would have been Anton LaVey who would have been operating, but still with influence from Aleister Crowley. The reason why the Church of Satan takes place is they just thought that the hippies were fake and superficial, and this is something that is being honest. Now, something like the Zodiac Killer could have been a continuation of that. I'm not completely opposed to those theories. I know you guys think that I mostly shut down far-out types of observations involving the Zodiac Killer mystery. However, I mean, the Zodiac was influenced by Crowley or LaVey. That could definitely have happened. I mean, I don't see why not. But let's get back to the book review. This tough world was being navigated by beautiful young women with stars in their eyes who descended on Los Angeles looking for fame. What they found instead were predatory men who viewed the aspiring starlets as expendable game. The Black Dahlia was 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, whose body was found dumped on a waste ground in an LA suburb. Here are some similarities between the Black Dahlia case and the Zodiac case. Firstly, Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. That is well within the Zodiac Killer's age range. The Zodiac targeted victims who were between 16 and 29 years old. I mean, even other Zodiac victims, female victims, were in their early 20s. Darlene Ferrin and Cecilia Shepard. Also, you'll note that even though the body of Elizabeth Short was mutilated, not only mutilated, but truly cut apart in a bisecting fashion, she was not moved to a different ground. Like, the killer did not try to conceal her remains. She wasn't buried. Her body was not cut into a bunch of pieces and scattered and dumped into the ocean. Her remains were left there. And this is something that I talk about all the time. The Zodiac Killer does not move the bodies after they've had their final resting place. And this is important because this really is some of the very technical things that happen in psychological profiling. Is the killer afraid of getting caught? Or does the killer want people to find the bodies? And with both the Black Dahlia Avenger connection and the Zodiac connection, it seems that the killer wants the bodies to be found, to be noticed, and to be recognized. So those are just some similarities. The newspapers of the time were allowed to access the evidence and potential suspects that would be unthinkable today. Often it was the journalists who moved the case forward. As evidence mounted, it seemed that the key figures within the police wished to stifle the investigation. Unusually for the time, the LAPD employed a forensic psychologist named Dr. Paul DeRiver. He produced the profile of the killer and was subsequently contacted by a man who appeared a potential fit. There were other suspects, but the most likely had powerful contacts who routinely paid the police for their cooperation. Now, this ties into the Zodiac Killer suspect George Hodel, because one thing that is said of him is that he was in charge of the venereal disease unit in Hollywood, more or less, he's the person who knows all about the sexually transmitted infections of the Hollywood stars, and thus he was able to enter into the elite circles. And if I understand this, the theory is that he didn't simply want to be the doctor to the Hollywood elites, dealing with the STIs of Hollywood, and yeah, he gets to attend their weird surrealist art parties that are happening behind the scenes, but he wanted to do something for his own right, for his own name, so he went on to commit the Black Dahlia crime, and it was a way of blending art and reality in an almost schizophrenic fashion, emphasis on almost. And the story is structured in a narrative that's Black Dahlia Red Rose, but it is written using facts gleaned from documents produced throughout the original investigation. The LAPD continue to refuse to release key evidence, some of which has mysteriously disappeared. The book provides a detailed account of the crime and those tasked with apprehending a murderer. It is a search for truth and suppressed on the remit of powerful individuals now dead. From the discovery of the body through the case being finally shelved, the reader is offered insights fully cross-referenced and explained in footnotes, a bibliography, and a detailed set of endnotes. The story is a lesson in the sham of a 1950s supposed value system and the lack of value placed on certain lives. The photographs at the end drawn from the evidence are chilling. The author has studied this evidence, consults with experts, and draws a conclusion as to the likely killer. And that is one thing that I'm going to have to do in the future. I'm going to have to go through Pugh Eatwell's book, as well as some other ones, particularly Severed, about the Black Dahlia case. Eatwell offers a cinematic retelling of the case that is evocative and compelling, an example of fact being more shocking than fiction. And this book, as you heard, is going to be written like a novel. It's going to be written in a narrative prose format, but Pugh Eatwell also did an interview on this same website, neverimitate.wordpress.com, and she states that all of her books are written that way, where they're meant to be more like creative nonfiction. They're written where the voices are narrated. However, she claims that she is using real facts, but she will not point to George Hodel as a Black Dahlia Avenger suspect, and she does claim that she has solved the case, so please look up for a follow-up episode to this. Now, I think that some of the other Black Dahlia Avenger suspects, as previously stated, Ed Edwards or Jack Torrance, those things might just simply be far-out ramblings that aren't too valuable to explore. But I do want to point out that there are these types of similarities with somebody who's targeting young women, particularly between the ages of 16 and into the mid to late 20s, and I think that that is very indicative of a heterosexual male, the way that the Zodiac crimes took place in the 1960s, and the female victims are in their late teens and early 20s. I tend to think that the Zodiac Killer was a heterosexual male, and he's operating within his sexual orientation. And one point that Gary Stewart, author of The Most Dangerous Animal of All, might have actually been spot on about is that the Zodiac Killer killed men as well, but he didn't care about them. They were just in his way. And it's not simply that I'm saying that. The Zodiac Killer did this very clearly at Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa, where we had surviving victims. In both of those instances, the man was attacked first, and it's attacking the man to get him out of the way so he has access to the women. And even though I don't think that the Zodiac Killer was the Black Dahlia Avenger, I do think that there are some similarities between the crimes. And when we look at the crimes such as Kevin Collins and Alexander Harris, I think that that is completely different. I think that that's a different killer, a different abductor. Those are most likely opportunistic sex offenders who have some type of desire to be with children, and this can come from long periods of abuse. I did an episode once on this channel called Anthony Emiela, the M25 rapist, and I was talking all about how he was abused and shunned by people, and he has these weird sexual perversions that just manifest because of the abuse in his life, and then he takes it out on unsuspecting individuals, even targeting children. Those are the types of behaviors that you will see, perhaps in the abductor of Kevin Collins and the abductor and murderer of Alexander Harris. And was that Richard Gaikowski? I mean, I simply do not know. I do think there's similarities in the composite sketches, and also hearing about how there was this man seen with Kevin Collins right before he disappeared. Okay, I suppose anything is possible, and I would not shut the door completely. And maybe as somebody got older, did their sexuality change in a particular way? That is definitely true. I mean, if I understand the narrative involving Gaikowski again, it's that he was trying to live as a heterosexual male in 1969. He was wrestling with his homosexual feelings, and he hadn't completely chosen to live the life as a gay man. Like, he's trying to deny it, he's chasing after women, he's trying to act like he's a straight male, but in reality he is not, and that's just denial at his point. And ultimately, Geik would go on to live out his life as a homosexual in the later part of the 20th century, and Geik passed away in 2004. But do you think there is any chance that the Zodiac killer committed the crimes involving Kevin Collins and Alexander Harris? And with the murder of Leonard Carl Smith, that one is way closer, way more likely to being actually Zodiac related. Now, I mean, a taxi driver's murdered in 1986. We'll have to investigate more, but definitely there's a similar crime, there's a motive. Blaine says that he knew this guy personally, or that Geik knew him personally, to be clear. And that is another thing that is shared in the Tappa Talk post, that Geik would have known Leonard Carl Smith, and so there are all these types of personal connections that could actually be established because, I mean, there's also a story out there that Geik was teaching computers to children. I haven't verified that yet, so I won't comment on that. Talking about Alexander Harris and Kevin Collins, I'm just going to say no comment on that one for now, but you guys can share your ideas in the comment section down below. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Again, anybody who makes a donation or contribution to help support the show will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, I thank you so much for your continued and reliable support. You are awesome. And our next one comes to us from Glenn Collins over at BuyMeACoffee.com. And Glenn Collins says, "Thanks for the great videos, Ned. I hope you enjoy the coffee." Absolutely. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. Anybody who donates will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And in conclusion, I would like to talk to you guys about the upcoming set of 1-minute book reviews that will be here on Black Box Online Radio. And are there any requests that you guys have? Which ones would you like to hear about first? Of course, I'm only going to be talking about books that I've actually read, and there are numerous Zodiac Killer book reviews that you can hear on this channel in their extended forms. But somebody had made a recommendation to me that I should make the long form content, which I put out regularly 3 times a week, and then I should have a set of YouTube shorts where I would just do something about 1 minute long, and then a set of medium length content about 5 to 10 minutes. So you have content for people who want to listen to the long episodes, content for people who want to listen to the shorts, and content for people who like medium episodes. And I tried to launch something new called Ned's Journal, but that's just not me. I mean, as you see this episode, talking and talking, going on and on, that's me. I'm somebody who definitely likes to explore ideas, and one of them was supposed to be 5 to 10 minutes. It turned into 26 minutes. That's just who I am. So I'll definitely do some journals from time to time, but I don't know if I would put them out regularly, and I also don't know if I would want to try and limit myself to 10 minutes for something like a journal. However, with the 1-minute book review, I've been able to get a little bit more focused and concentrated, and some of the books that I've talked about in the past on this channel have been Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant, as well as America's Jack the Ripper by Soren Korsgaard, and also The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up by Lyndon Lafferty, The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Oswell, Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac by Zed Simpson, the Zodiac Serial Killer Trilogy authored by Mark Hewitt, Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed. And those are just like the ones off the top of my head. I mean, of course, the Jared Kobek books, Motor Spirit, and How to Find Zodiac. And if you would like to hear what I think about those books, I did a 2-part book discussion about Motor Spirit on this channel, but for the book How to Find Zodiac by Jared Kobek, I incorporated the material into several different Zodiac Killer news reports, but it should come to the top of the search engine, and one of them has the title and Jared Kobek's name in the thumbnail, and that one should be relatively easy to find. But the Motor Spirit one is done in 2 standalone episodes, and of course Zodiac Killer, Just the Facts, the police report arrangements done by Tom Voigt, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer by Thomas Horan, as well as doing another book discussion on the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, which is the first part of that book, also by Thomas Horan. So, what would you guys like to hear about? As I said, I did Zodiac Unmasked and Time 17 already, and they're just going to be very, very brief. And one thing that you can do with the YouTube Shorts is you can just listen to many of them in order, and they are really short and fast moving, and I'm also getting much better at matching up the images to the direct subject material with the short because you can focus your time and energy like that. So please look out for a lot of new material here on this channel, and those are going to be coming out on the off days. As I said, I'll be releasing 4 of them a week until I go through all the books that I've read. I have a couple more books that I've read in the past about JonBenet Ramsey that I will work into this, and in the distant future, I repeat, the mega distant future, I will get to the books about Jack the Ripper and the Long Island serial killer, but I'm a newcomer to those cases, so I have to read them first. I mean, absolutely shocking, gotta read something before you do a book review on it, but rules are rules, those unofficial rules of life which I'm trying my best to follow. So feel free to look out for some books here on this channel and book reviews, 1-minute book reviews in the YouTube Shorts section. That will be all for me now, and thank you so much for listening to this episode. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram, and I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.